My name's Earl Nichols, and I'm a senior pastoral counselor at the Pastoral Institute. Every year during the holiday season, the Pastoral Institute hosts an event called Holiday Hope. I've had the privilege of facilitating that for the last 6 years, and I began wondering back in September, what would we be able to do for the community, for those who've had the loss of loved ones since last holiday season. I knew we wouldn't be able to host an event at the community room where people the last 6 years have come, have sat in a circle and shared their experiences of loss from the previous year. I'm so thankful that First Baptist is hosting this event. I'm thankful that you'll have access to this and be able to view it at your leisure, because I felt like it was a very important event. It never had a lot of people participate, but it seemed to be a very meaningful and very touching event for those who participated. So I'm so thankful, even though I can't have the opportunity to sit in a circle with you, to listen to your stories, to share with you, to offer mutual support, that we've had to adjust our format, but I'm thankful that we have this opportunity to speak to you. I'll be speaking for the next few minutes, and then we will have a panel kind of discussion with a group of us up here on the platform. Holiday Hope is designed to speak to the needs of those who are grieving because of the loss of a loved one since last holiday season, to offer some encouragement, to offer some support, and to offer some ideas of how one might best traverse the coming weeks through the end of the year. What is grief? I've been fascinated by the issue of grief and grieving since I was a small boy. My first encounter with grief was at age 6. And at every decade of my life since that time, I've had the loss of some important loved one in my life. This past year, in May, it was the loss of my mother. And so I am intrigued by death, dying, but I'm most intrigued by how people cope, how people deal with, how they move through the seasons of grief. I'm going to be talking a little about that. There is no good definition of grief, but one of my favorite kind of descriptions says, grief is the form love takes when someone we love dies. Grief is the form love takes when someone we love dies. I'm intrigued by the subject of grief and by the many, many grieving people I've worked with as pastor, as hospital chaplain, working with the terminally ill. I've just been surrounded and had the wonderful opportunity to work with grieving people, to accompany them through probably the most difficult journeys of their lives when they've graciously invited me to travel with them for a while. And some of the things that intrigue me about grief. One is the paradox. Grief is universal. The average family has a loss of a loved one on average every 13 years. So most of us don't go too long without facing the loss of a loved one and the grief process that goes along with that. But one of the problems is those 13 years don't come in a consecutive planned pattern. Within a matter of a relatively few years, I lost all of my aunts and uncles, and then our family went without loss for a while. So we may average a loss every 13 years, but sometimes it seems all of those deaths get crowded at a certain point. Another paradox is grief is universal. We all face it, like the average family every 13 years. But while it's universal, it's something we all share with everybody. At the very same time, it's unique. No two people grieve the same way. Frequently in my office, I get asked by people who've lost a loved one, is the way I'm grieving normal? Is the way I'm grieving okay? It's been this long since my wife, child, parent, husband, beloved aunt, uncle died. In terms of the grief process, am I where I ought to be? Which highlights both the sense that grief is universal, but it's also unique. So people want to compare themselves with the universal. Is this the way other people grieve? While at the same time owning their own personal process that is unique to them as individuals. Another of the paradoxes of grief is not just the universal and unique. Another one of them is grief both ends and never ends. I talk with people who say, I lost this loved one 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year, 2 years. And I both completed my grieving, meaning what is called the acute phase is done. When will I be done grieving? And the answer is grief is both time limited and also never ending. Another of the paradoxes of grief. Another paradox of grief is the fact that we both grieve best in our solitude, in our alone time, and at the same time we grieve best when we grieve with others, when we have a sense of connection. So one of the paradoxes of grief is we both need to do it individually and we need to do it collectively. And I continue to be intrigued, continue to be mystified by these paradoxes that are irresolvable. They never completely conclude. We continue to live with them. When I was a small boy, my brother died. It was a devastating loss for our family. My mother died at age 91. And the times I was with her on the date of her son's birth and the date of his death till the day she died were still bad days on the calendar. She'd long since buried her son. She lived life with the scar of that. She lived life, the rest of her life, with about 363 great days a year. But there were 2 days that were never healed for her. Grief both ends and never ends. What are some of the things we've learned about grief? Rabbi Earl Nichols, writing about grief, said, "Grief is not a disorder, not a disease, nor a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. It's the price you pay for love. The only cure for grief is to grieve." He identifies the emotional, the physical, the spiritual. What are some of the signs of the emotional loss that one lives with? Well, some of those are sadness, certainly with the sense of loss, yearning to have that person that is gone to return, fear about life and how one is to continue living life in the absence of the beloved person. Sometimes anger at the way the person was taken, or even sometimes anger at the person for being gone. Sometimes guilt. Survivor's guilt is the guilt one feels for surviving while the loss is still so acute and painful. The fact that he or she is gone, I'm still here and I shouldn't be. Guilt. I spoke with one person today, actually by phone, who referenced a death recently, actually back in the winter of last year. The person said, I still, when I think of this person, feel numb. One of the emotional losses in terms of grief, numbness. And then sometimes people feel a sense of relief. There's the mixed feeling of me sitting across from a person who says, I feel this deep sense of loss at what the person meant to me and how much it has cost me. Very genuine sense of loss. But I also feel a sense of relief because the person's not suffering. And I hear them struggle with that mixed feeling, that being pulled in two directions like a tug of war, back and forth between that sense of loss for which they grieve deeply and the sense of relief, which is often hard to claim and accept because there seems to be something wrong about that. Emotional losses. Sometimes the loss is also accompanied by physical loss. Some of the symptoms of that, of course, crying, sighing, headaches, changes, particularly a decrease in appetite, sometimes sleep problems, aches, pains, sometimes increased illnesses. It's amazing to look at the statistics of the health of people who've lost a loved one in the coming year or two. How many of them suffer from accidents? They fall off ladders. They are distracted while driving. But health problems, including increases in heart problems, respiratory problems. So all of those as physical responses. Problems of a weakened immune system because the stress, the hormones in their body, the body does not adjust to easily and well. So, physical issues. Then Rabbi Grollman also talked about the spiritual dilemmas that people face. I've been perplexed for a long time and still have no insight whatsoever of the differences. How come some people of faith go through a loss and their faith seems depleted, empty, and sometimes they, quote, lose their faith? While it is at the same time an equally fervent, committed, faithful person in the midst of that loss says, I found a renewed sense of connection with God. I found a new deepening of my faith. I've tried to figure out what is the difference between those who say there was a loss of faith and those who say there was a gain of faith. I've been woefully inadequate at guessing when people go through a loss what it will do to their faith. But I do know if they're people of faith, it will impact their faith in some meaningful and powerful way. Some people are angry. I often have people that say to me, I've lost this person, and as I help them process that sense of loss, they talk to me about anger, and is it permissible to be angry at God for God taking my loved one away, or God not protecting and saving my loved one when God ought to have been able to do that? Why didn't God do that? Is it okay to be angry at God? Then there are social losses or social symptoms. Some people detach from other people. They need to disconnect. They need to isolate. And I would say, if that's where you are, if you need to do that for a brief time to kind of gather yourself, to kind of recenter yourself, to kind of find that centered place, that place of balance, which often takes time and effort. Don't be too concerned if it's temporary. But if you find it beginning to extend beyond what seems to be reasonable, if you find yourself not just disengaged but avoiding, not just not wanting to interact with people but not wanting to at all be with people, please take that seriously. Be concerned about that. Over the years I've been doing Holiday Hope, I've collected questions from people. And a lot of them seem to show up because each year it's a different population. It'll be another 15 or 20 or 25 people who are asking the same kind of questions that were asked the year before and the year before that and the year before that. And I often wonder how to respond. I certainly don't think I'm presumptuous enough to assume I have answers for all the people's questions. I often sit there in my own feeling of inadequacy, trying to figure out what might be a helpful thing to say. And a couple of years ago, I came across a writing by David Kessler, who's a specialist, one who was written extensively in the field of grief. And he has these tips for grieving through the holidays. I'll interrupt what I have to say for a moment and say, I'm going to be talking about David Kessler's tips for grieving. I also put together a resource for those who are grieving that offers resources on the subjects of the grief for the loss of a spouse or a partner, for general grieving and loss, resources for grieving children, resources for grieving parents, resources for those who survive one who's committed suicide. Number of books are on that list. Number of online resources are there. And if you go to the Pastoral Institute website and look for Holiday, you can find the tips from David Kessler that I'm going to be going over, and these resources, books and online resources that may be helpful to you. Please, if you need those resources, please look for them. They are resources with which I am personally familiar. Hope that they are helpful. But here are some of the things that David Kessler offers as tips for grieving through the holidays. 1, if you need to, give yourself permission to cancel the holidays. One of the questions I was frequently asked is, do I have to decorate for Christmas? Do I have to host Thanksgiving? Every Thanksgiving they meet at my house, or I always prepare the turkey or the stuffing or the dressing, or if you've had a loss this last year and you don't want to do those things, give yourself permission to cancel the holidays just for this year. Number 2, be honest about your grief. If somebody says how you're doing, please don't fall into the cliche of, I'm just fine, I'm doing well, everything's going well. No, you've suffered the loss, a profound, deep loss. And if it's someone who is interested, deeply concerned, and seriously wants to support you, offer them the opportunity to bless you and encourage and support you. Be honest about your grief. Number 3, include, if you celebrate the holidays this year, include the loss in the holidays. Such things as put out a candle in memory of the loved one. If there are favorite foods that they like that you want to prepare that food. Tell stories when the families gather together. Not all the stories of loss, but the stories of wonderful experiences, times of celebration and joy. It's a part of your grieving process. Tell the story of loss, yes. But tell the story of joy, of celebration. Number 4, reevaluate your rituals. There are families that always decorate the same way, and it's an important ritual for them. The regular doing of that is a part of the celebration, playing the same music while they decorate the tree, or if it's a season for the Jewish holidays around Hanukkah and all of that. Reevaluate your rituals. Think about, is this something we need to do this year? And claim the ones that are still important to you. Embrace them. But if they're not meaningful this year, it's okay to let them go. Number 5, pay attention to the children. I was 6 years old when my brother died, and everybody forgot that I had lost a brother. They were keenly aware my parents had lost a son. And they kind of abandoned me, thinking that at 6 years of age, I didn't understand the loss, and they were right. I didn't understand the loss, but I knew something profoundly important had happened, and I knew there was a terrible, deep sense of loss in our family. Include the children, and model appropriate grieving for them. If you are in tears, please don't hide that from them. Let them see you grieve in ways that are appropriate, because that is permission giving for them in terms of their sense of loss, which won't be like your sense of loss. Remember, grief is both universal and unique. They will grieve in their way. Help them see how you grieve in your way to offer them permission. Number 6, don't be surprised at what triggers you. You'll look at things that will be reminders. When you look at them and wonder, I wonder what it was about that triggered me, don't bother asking that question. Just realize there are things that are going to trigger memories spontaneously, suddenly, for which you are totally unprepared. And that's okay. It is okay. Don't be surprised at what triggers you. Number 7, remember, they don't understand your grief. Anybody that says to you, I know exactly what you're going through, has no idea what you're going through. Anybody that says it's going to be fine, or you're going to be okay, or you're strong, or you'll handle this, doesn't understand. But remember, no one can understand your grief. It is unique to you. And they grieve in their ways that you can't understand, and you grieve in your ways they can't understand. Number 8, at events, have a planned exit strategy. My guess is this holiday season there won't be so many parties, there won't be so many events. There'll be a lot of the celebrations that we'll skip this year. But if you get invited to one, if you're expected to attend one at work, if you're expected to attend one at church, if you're expected to attend one for the family or the community, plan an exit strategy. When you've had about all you can take, don't place yourself in the position of, I'd like to get out of here, but I don't know how. Plan for how you'd want to get out if you need to. It's enough to be able to say, I'm going to be speaking with a friend. Some way that's honest and straightforward that will allow you to leave when you become uncomfortable. Plan an exit strategy. Number 9, remember, no is a complete sentence. You don't have to explain why. It is enough if someone says, are you planning to host Thanksgiving as you always have? Are you going to do that this year? It's enough to say no. Not, no, I would if, just the word no is a complete sentence. Be respectful, be gentle, be firm. No is a complete sentence. Number 10, don't forget pets. Pets bring joy to our lives. Pets bring meaning to our lives. I used to have a beautiful golden retriever, and I had a message, I wish I were the person my dog thinks I am. She was an important part of our life. And if your love for a pet is real, your grief for the loss of a pet is real. Don't deny it, just claim it. Number 11, take your grief online. There are all kinds of helpful resources that you can find online. If you look, support groups, people that have been through what you're going through, remember, they don't understand your grief, you don't understand theirs, but the grief process is universal enough that you can find support and encouragement and connection with people. Again, if you go to the PI website and look under holidays, you'll see these resources, some of which are online resources. You may want to check those out. And then 12th and last, remember, you can have grief bursts and love bursts. You can suddenly have that wonderful feeling of how much you love the other person and just be deeply enriched at the fact that they contributed to your life so profoundly, so meaningfully, so powerfully, and a few minutes later be in tears at the loss. You can have love bursts and grief bursts, and there is no rhyme or reason for why they come and go. Just realize if it's early in the grieving process or you're in the process this year, there may be those moments when the grief becomes profound, deep, overwhelming, so burdensome that it's deep anguish. And at the same time, a bit later, you suddenly remember the incidents of joy and celebration and love and passion and all the wonderful things you had. And both are very real and very meaningful. One of the things that I will miss this year in terms of holiday hope is the opportunity to sit in the community room at the Pastoral Institute in a circle with grieving people. And I typically share for about 5 to 7 minutes out of something I know about grief, something out of my experience or reading, whatever. Then I open it up and people begin talking spontaneously about who they lost and how they've been grieving through the year. And some of the people who had losses last March and February and January talk about the journey they've been through. And some people who've had losses in October or November, very early in the grief process, they exchange thoughts and support and ideas, and they share experiences. That's the powerful point of holiday hope. Certainly is not the introduction that I contribute for 5 or 7 minutes. The power of that is their shared experience and how they love, support, and care for each other. And I can't do that this year. I think it would be unwise. So in lieu of that, the Pastoral Institute on its website has collected some questions that have been submitted by people. And I'm going to read the questions and then try to give some response based on my experience, both personally and as a clergy person and as a counselor. So this is my way of wanting to cope, connect, be with people who are out there someplace and on a different year might be in a circle with me at the Pastoral Institute. This year, you're out there and I'm connecting as best I can with you virtually. So here's a question. I look forward to the holidays to have fun with my family, but since we lost our father, many of them spend the holidays upset, and it's not fun anymore. What do I do not to seem insensitive during these times? I just want the fun to return. Well, let me respond in a couple of ways. If you're perceived as insensitive, it's because you grieve in your way, not their way. You have your path to journey, they have theirs. And I would hope that your family would find honorable ways, wonderful ways to affirm both the presence of Father and the absence of Father. And that as a group they would covenant, maybe this year is just not going to be fun. It just may not be fun this year. But there's next year, and there's the year after. And one of the ways you honor Dad is to say, if Dad were here, we'd be having fun. In a year or two, to honor Dad, we're going to have fun. Because he is still with us. Emotionally, spiritually, he is still present with us. And right now, we can't see his presence. We can't feel his presence. We only feel the sense of loss. But in a year or two, we'll come to a perspective and remember the joy, the happiness, the fun that we had together. And in reclaiming that, you honor him. What if I embarrass myself by breaking down and making people feel bad during the holidays? I want to say, you're not going to make anyone feel bad. Your pain is not going to become their pain. You feeling your pain may give them permission to feel their pain. Your feeling your pain is not a shaming or embarrassing or humiliating experience for you. It is honoring in your way the person that you lost. There are people who won't understand that. I have people who tell me in their office, tell me in my office, so-and-so said I should be further along, or I shouldn't be grieving this way, or there's a right way to grieve. When I was in college in the summer, I went home for a summer, and I was a substitute pianist in the local funeral home. And so when the regular pianist couldn't be there, I filled in, and I sat through lots of funerals. And I asked the funeral director once, from his observation many years as a funeral director, what was the right way to grieve? There were people who were very staid, stoic, and appeared almost cold and unfeeling. There were other people who were deeply touched and sobbing and grieving and crying and weeping. And I remember Bill looking at me and saying, after working as I have as a funeral director for many, many years, the right way to grieve is the person's way. There isn't a right way to grieve. If your way of grieving is to be in tears, it is your way and it is right. And if other people can't grasp that, you're not making them feel bad. You're simply grieving the loss of someone you love in your way. Give yourself permission to do that. I'm anxious just thinking about this holiday without my loved one. How do I cope with just wanting to avoid it all and skip the entire season? Number 1 by David Kessler. Give yourself permission to cancel the holidays. You're allowed this year to say, I just don't have it. I just do not have it in me. I don't feel the joy of the season, and I don't want to act like I do feel the joy of the season. It is okay to cancel, or if the rest of the family needs to get together, or the friends, or the community, or the church, or whatever, it's okay to say, I hope you have a great time, I hope you celebrate. But remember, the word no is a complete sentence. You can say, but I won't be there. And that's okay. How do I cope with the grief of losing my grandmother and the traditions of going to her home? The answer is the cure for grief is grieving. How do you grieve your grandmother? In whatever way you feel that sense of loss. As for the traditions of going to her home, this year it's okay not to. If you do choose to go, it's okay not to keep up the old traditions and do what you've always done. It's also okay to go and do all the things you've always done. There is no right way to celebrate the holidays, whatever those are for you. But if you go, remember, there will be things that trigger you. The first time I went to my grandmother's house after she died, I sat in the kitchen and I imagined her closing the oven. She made wonderful homemade biscuits. They were so light, I had to load them down with butter or they'd float off the plate. I had to keep putting butter on to keep loading them down. And I sat in her kitchen listening to the tick-tock of the mantle clock or the clock up over the door, tick-tock, tick-tock. And I sat at the table behind the red tablecloth where I'd eaten so many breakfasts and so many meals. And there were multiple triggers. I could almost smell the biscuits and gravy that she made, the best in the world. I could hear the sounds and I could feel the feelings. And I both was overjoyed at the realization of what my grandmother had contributed to me and profoundly saddened that no more would she be in that kitchen closing the stove with her knee because she was using both hands to hold the biscuits to make sure she didn't drop any. What do you do when you go to Grandma's house? Celebrate Grandma and realize how sad it is she's not there, and realize she is still there because of your memories of her. Again, similar question to an earlier one. How do I set boundaries with my family if I don't feel like continuing our holiday tradition? Tell them what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. Don't defend it. Don't explain it. Don't sit down and try to convince them. Let them do the holidays the way they need to do the holidays. You do the holidays the way you need to do the holidays. If they need to gather and you need not to, or if they always gather on Christmas Eve and you say, I'm going to come early, I'm not going to stay, you grieve in the way you need to and allow them to do the same. Their keeping the traditions may be very much their grief process, and you choosing not to may be very much your grief process. But remember, the only cure for grief is grieving. I want to thank you for this time, for your attention. I hope what I've had to say is helpful. If you find that you get through the holiday season, I don't know how to tell you what acute grief is, but I can tell you if that deep sense of pain and loss just doesn't seem to be going away, the time of acute grief typically is somewhere between 10 and 14 months. That doesn't mean days won't get better and better and the bad days further apart. But if after 10 to 14 months you just feel like you're stuck and can't get past this, you can always call us at the Pastoral Institute. We'd love to talk with you. I hope and pray the holidays for you will be satisfying, fulfilling. I hope you both claim your grief, celebrate the loss of the person, and feel the loss of the person. Celebrate what they've contributed so much to your life. Grieve the fact that cannot continue. And then honor them with the legacy of living out what you think they would wish for you. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your attentiveness. In a moment or two, we're going to have a panel up here discussing these and other things that we hope may also be helpful to you. Thank you very much.